Hi everyone, welcome to the next 3 chapters of Llama Out Loud by Annabelle Sami. So we read up to chapter 18 just before half term. So if you haven't watched up to chapter 19, then go back and watch those ones. So we're going to be doing chapter 19, 20 and 21 in this video. So let me find it. Here we go. So chapter 19, Levi spills the beans. Sounds exciting. In all the years that Yasmin Shah had attended Fish Lane Primary School, she had not once been given detention. Yet here she was for the second time in 2 weeks, sitting in silence and watching the clock tick by slowly. Levi had tried to convince her that it was character building to get detention. Yasmin wasn't convinced. She stared blankly at the empty whiteboard and thought about everything that had led her to this point. Had she made the right decisions? Should she have tried harder to stand up for herself? She was uncertain. The only thing she was absolutely sure of was that Levi was to blame. Ever since that awful day when he came tumbling out of the cupboard, her life had gone from bad to worse. Whatever had caused Levi to come to life, whether magic or mutation, was a curse. Each second seemed to pass slower in the detention room. Even the head teacher, who always supervised after-school detention, was nodding off, her head drooping over the marking on her desk. There were only 3 students to watch over: Yasmin, a small boy called Owen, and Ezra. Ezra was trying to concentrate on his homework. He tapped his pencil repeatedly against the desk, drumming a little rhythm with his eyes closed. Levi joined in, clicking his heels on the hard floor in time with Ezra's drumming. Yasmin put her fingers in her ears, but she could still hear the tap, tap, tap of the llama's feet. It was like somebody had given tap shoes to a colony of ants. Ezra smiled at Yasmin, giving her a thumbs up. Yasmin gave him a quick mournful wave in reply. She aimed another firm kick towards Levi, who went scampering out of the room. "Excuse me, miss," Owen piped up. "My pen exploded." The head teacher blinked awake. "That's the second time today, Owen. You must stop chewing it." She sighed and gestured to the door. "Ezra, can you take Owen to the boys' toilets to wash out his mouth? And then go to Lost Property and get him a clean shirt?" The 2 boys trooped out of the classroom, with Ezra trying to stifle a giggle at the blue ink spilling down Owen's chin like a strange beard. Almost as soon as the boys were out in the corridor, the school receptionist popped his head round the corner with a worried look on his face. "Very sorry to bother you," he said, "but there is a small issue with the staff room fish tank." "What sort of issue?" the head teacher snapped. The receptionist glanced over at Yasmin and lowered his voice. "Somebody appears to have tried to feed the fish with, chocolate digestives." "Whatever next?" the head teacher sighed, getting up from the desk. "I'll be right there. Wait here, please, Yasmin." Chocolate digestives? Something seemed fishy to Yasmin, and it wasn't the actual fish. A few moments later, Levi came trotting back into the classroom, a little out of breath. "Finally!" he exhaled, jumping up on the desk. "I thought I'd never get you alone." Yasmin threw her hands in the air. That was it. She wasn't going to take any more of Levi and his mission to ruin her life. She grabbed a piece of paper and wrote in angry letters, "Leave me alone!" "But that's just it, Yasmin," Levi replied. "I can't." "Why?" Yasmin scratched into the paper so hard that it tore through. Writing wasn't enough to express how angry she was. Why? "Because I'm your guardian llama," Levi shouted. Yasmin fell off her chair. "See, that's what I was trying to avoid," Levi remarked. He jumped off the desk and tugged on Yasmin's sleeve with his mouth to help her up. She settled back in her chair, shaking her head. A guardian llama? This was definitely the most ridiculous thing Levi had ever said. She grabbed her pen and wrote in capitals, "Tell me everything." Levi scratched behind his ear. "I've already told you a bit too much." Yasmin jabbed her finger at the page again. "Everything." Levi sighed. "Obviously, this all happened well before my time, but there was this guy. He was like a god of animals. He lived in ancient Peru, and his name was, Hercule something. Hercule, Yasmin wrote. She knew she'd been paying extra attention in that history class for a reason. How'd you know that? Levi seemed impressed. Anyway, he was sick of us llamas being sacrificed all the time at the beginning of every moon cycle. He was a llama himself, you see. Multicoloured, so sick. So he used his magic to cast a spell. Instead of 30 llamas being sacrificed at the beginning of the month, he saved them by turning them into toy llamas. The spell continues to this day. That's how I was made. I used to be a real llama, and then one day, pop, here I was in the fluff. It's way better being a magic toy than a real llama. Let me tell you, I could travel the world. Yasmin stared at Levi, unblinking, for a good minute in silence. Then she wrote, So you are actually magic? Levi cocked an eyebrow. I'm a talking toy llama, Yasmin. Of course I'm magic. It's well better than standing around eating grass. And there are other toy llamas, like you. I'm not really meant to tell you this bit either, said Levi, but since those early days, we've become more organised. As toys, we can do anything and go anywhere without raising eyebrows. Llamas love kids, so we tasked ourselves with being guardians for children across the world. There's a whole network of us. We're called the Seen Not Heard group. I'm surprised you didn't figure it out from Llamas of London. Yasmin remembered the section about Reginald following official orders from SNH. Seen, not heard. We can be seen by anyone as normal toy llamas, but not heard, Levi explained. Each llama is assigned a kid to help. Plus, we love hanging out with kids. That's why I'm here, to help you. Yasmin grabbed her pen again. She has so many questions, especially about the multicoloured llama god. But the main thing she wanted to say was, you haven't helped. At all. My methods are a bit unconventional, Levi admitted. I ain't done this for a while. The head agent of the Seen Not Heard group is Mama Llama. She assigned me to you to see if I've still got it. If I don't help you, Mama Llama says I'll be turned into a stupid farm animal again, and I'll have to stay in a rubbish paddock all day with no friends. So that was who Levi had been chatting to on the phone. Mama Llama wasn't his mum, she was his boss. I don't need your help, Yasmin wrote, scribbling at the page with tears in her eyes. Yes, you do, Levi insisted. You made a wish on your birthday to be able to stand up for yourself. I'm here to make that come true and to help you hang out with more youngsters. I thought if I just annoyed you enough, eventually you'd speak up. It ain't quite worked out the way I wanted, he admitted. Yasmin tore up the paper and threw the pieces into the air. She let herself cry all the tears she'd been trying to hold back. How did this menace think he was helping? Why did this have to happen to her? What on earth was a Mama Llama? Oh, love, don't cry. Levi's tail hung between his legs. I'm sorry, all right. He seemed surprised at the words that had come out of his mouth. At that moment, Ezra came sloping into the classroom. He was alone. I'm back, he sang before stopping short at the sight of Yasmin in tears. What happened? Yasmin shook her head and turned away. Ezra sat down at the desk next to Yasmin. He started picking up the little pieces of torn-up paper and arranging them on the desk. It's okay. I don't like people seeing me cry either, he said, sliding the pieces of paper around. But sometimes when I tell my mum what's making me sad, I don't feel sad anymore. It's weird. Yasmin sniffed and wiped her eyes. Even if she preferred to be alone, Ezra was trying to be nice. And after being harassed by a llama all day, she appreciated niceness. If you don't tell anyone what's making you sad, then they won't be able to fix it, Ezra went on. Like when a little engine light flashes behind the car steering wheel, it's telling you there's something wrong with the engine. He finished pushing around the pieces of paper on the desk. He'd formed them into a smiley face. Yasmin considered his words. They seemed to make sense, although nothing in her life was making sense at the moment. It was all one confusing llama-shaped disaster. Plus, she just had a whole lesson on ancient Peru that would definitely not be coming up in history class. She got out a new piece of paper and wrote, "Thank you." Ezra smiled. No problem. That's what friends are for, right? Yasmin nodded slowly. That's what friends were for. The head teacher popped her head around the door, tapping her watch. It's 4:30 now. You're free to go. Oh, and don't do it again. Detention is boring for everyone, including the teachers. 4:30 p.m. Yasmin's head shot around to look at the clock. She was going to be late for her checkers semi-final at Old. All the talk of llama gods and magical toys had completely taken her mind off the competition. Hurriedly, she began packing away her things. What's the rush? Ezra asked, watching Yasmin zip up her bag. Yasmin wrote the letters Old in the air with her finger. Ezra's eyes widened in understanding. The semi-final! Can I come? My mum doesn't get home from work until 5:30. Yasmin nodded and gestured frantically for him to follow. Any later and she might miss her slot. She didn't know that something much worse than that was about to happen. Chapter 20. Chaos. Thy name is Llama. Yasmin's opponent for the semi-final match was a 92-year-old gentleman named Dennis Wrinklebottom. He was nicknamed Dennis the Menace, not because of his striped top, but because he had a tendency to chase pigeons down Brick Lane on his mobility scooter. There had been 6 such accidents since he'd got his licence back in March. If you're thinking that you don't need a licence to ride a mobility scooter, you're correct. The local council invented scooter licences specifically for Dennis the Menace Wrinklebottom. Please, reader, look both ways before crossing the street. I would hate for you to face the same fate as those pigeons. Rest in peace. As obvious as it might seem, nobody ever made fun of Dennis's last name. Mr. Wrinklebottom had put up with it for his entire life. By now, he had heard every single joke in the book. Anyway, how much funnier could you make a name like Wrinklebottom? If you can think of a way, please do send me a letter. With all the fuss and drama of zooming through the door just in time for her match, all eyes were now on Yasmin as she took her seat at the checkers table. If there were 2 things Old loved, they were fuss and drama. Of course, Ezra was also watching. It was actually quite nice having a teammate to cheer her on, even if that teammate did periodically wander off to play with some shiny object he'd seen across the room. The stopwatch started and the game began. The tension built. It was touch and go for a while, with Dennis and Yasmin level pegging. Then, within 3 moves, Yasmin captured 4 of Dennis's pieces and was heading towards gaining a king. Ezra was standing close to Jilly, who had given him a Go Yasmin banner she'd made. Each time Yasmin captured a piece, Ezra nodded his head, enraptured, and held the banner up. Dennis's shaky hands hopped one of his black pieces over Yasmin's white piece, capturing it for himself. Suddenly, Yasmin noticed something out of the corner of her eye, a fairy leg protruding from a bookcase in the corner of the room. It was holding a small sign, a sign that said, Go Dennis. Yasmin banged her fist on the table, making Dennis yelp. Some guardian llama Levi was. Even if he thought he was helping by stopping her hanging out here, she wasn't about to let him sabotage her game. She deliberately sacrificed her piece to move to the end of the board. Now she had a king piece and could move backwards to secure the rest of Dennis's pieces. Jilly clapped her hands. You've got this! You've got this, Yasmin! Ezra whispered excitedly. Yasmin smiled at him. It was the 6th minute and very clear that she was in the lead. Dennis was falling straight into her trap, moving around the board where she secretly led him. He furrowed his big bushy eyebrows and muttered to himself a few times before looking up at his opponent. A menace on the streets does not make you a menace on the checkers board. Well, Yasmin, he sighed, offering Yasmin a big pat on the back and a raisin cookie. You've beaten me. Yasmin beamed. She was going to the checkers tournament finals with no chaos involved. But Chaos was Levi the Llama's middle name. Levi Chaos the Llama. It sounded better in his head. Chapter 21. The Golden Oldie Rules. Psst! Yasmin! Levi hissed from behind a teapot. What I'm about to do is for your own good. Yasmin's tummy lurched. This couldn't be good. Okay, now this is the adventures of Secret Agent Levi. 10 minutes earlier. What's he doing? Well, well, well. What have we got here? Membership rules strict. Rule number 1, members must not be any younger than 80. Rule number 2, members must be at least 80 years old. I've got you now. I ain't failing this mission. Oh. Luckily, Levi kept his llama landline close by at all times. Dr. Mr. Leader of the old place. Now to wait for the perfect time to hit send. Ooh. Wonder how that's going to play out, what he's going to do. Yasmin located Levi under the tea trolley and kicked it sharply. The cups rattled noisily. Are you all right, Yasmin? Jilly asked at the unexpected outburst. Yasmin tried to smile reassuringly, although she ended up just looking rather constipated. She's probably just excited to have won, Ezra assured Jilly. Yasmin nodded and tried to keep her eyes away from the tea trolley. You're not going to learn to stand up for yourself here, Levi continued. You need friends your own age. Trust me, I've got this. A whooshing sound came from his phone. He'd sent the email. Oh no. Yasmin flung her hand underneath the tea trolley and snatched the mobile from Levi's grasp. Too late. Mr. Matthews' phone pinged. He jumped. I'm still not used to this thing. Scares the living daylights out of me, he grumbled. Perching his reading glasses on the end of his nose, he peered at the phone. What is it, Matthew? Jilly asked. Yasmin was too anxious to even wonder what had possessed his parents to call their son Matthew Matthews. Well, he said, squinting at his phone, it seems to be an email from a concerned old member, a Mr. L. Armour. I don't remember him, Jilly mused. That Fleabag, thought Yasmin. And what a stupid name. He could have at least tried Sir Llama or Dr. Haymuncher. Mr. Matthews cleared his throat. Dear Mr. Leader of the old place, he read. It's come to my attention during a routine visit to your group that you have someone participating in the black and white circle game thingy that should not be playing. In fact, she should not be allowed on these premises at all. The whole room of old members collectively gasped. Drama. What on earth is he talking about? Jilly said. Suddenly, the Old Handbook came sliding out from underneath the tea trolley at an alarming speed. It came to an abrupt stop as it bashed against Mr. Matthews' ankles and fell open on the page that had been earmarked and stamped, especially for this moment. Tentatively, Mr. Matthews picked it up. He read out rule number 1. Members must not be any younger than 80 years old. Then why is Yasmin allowed to come every week? Mrs. Begum pondered. Because of her school programme, remember? Jilly said, rising from her armchair. Yasmin knew that things were bad then. Jilly only stood up in extreme emergencies. Once, when the toaster had caught fire and everyone evacuated, Jilly refused to move until the firefighters carried her out. But she is only 9 years old, Mr. Matthews countered. Yasmin held up 10 fingers. Okay, 10 years old. That's still 70 years off, Mr. Matthews said. Yasmin is a special case, Jilly said, stepping in front of Yasmin. This was really bad. Mr. Matthews did not like being challenged. But Mr. Patel isn't, even though he's 80 in 1 week's time. An excited group of old members clustered around, watching the back and forth like a tennis match. Jilly looked flustered. Yasmin has always come on a Friday. Rules are rules, Miss Gillian. As old group leader, I have to uphold the rules. Mr. Matthews plonked the handbook right on top of the checkers board, sending checkers pieces flying everywhere. Some even landed in the cups of tea on the trolley. What's so special about those stupid rules anyway? Ezra demanded. Yasmin is 80 at heart. He paused. Wait, that came out wrong. Are you absolutely sure, Matthew? Jilly pleaded. Isn't there anything in there about special exceptions? Mr. Matthews studied the handbook once more. He read rule number 1. He read rule number 2. Then he read rule number 1 again. And then he read rule number 2 again, just to be sure. Yasmin gulped. Her fate lay in Mr. Matthews' hands. He scratched his head. It says that members have to be of a certain mature age. Jilly quickly interjected. But Yasmin is a very mature 10-year-old. At that moment, the tea trolley next to Yasmin flipped over, sending tea and digestives flying everywhere. Surprise! Levi shouted at Yasmin as he jumped out of the trolley with a biscuit in his mouth. Ooh! Squealed an elderly lady, clapping her hands together in delight. The llama had already dashed back into Yasmin's bag. She looked frantically around her, but of course, no one else could hear or see Levi. All they could see was Yasmin and £30 worth of good quality digestives splattered across the floor. Does that seem mature to you, Miss Gillian? Mr. Matthews said. You upset her, Ezra said in Yasmin's defence. It's not her fault she got angry. Yasmin grabbed Ezra's arm and tried to get him to stop talking, but Gillian and Ezra were doing the arguing for her. Matthew, she has the checkers tournament to win. You can't chuck her out now. Jilly was turning very pink in the cheeks. Mr. Matthews marched to the funky door and flung it open. Yasmin, the email from Mr. L. Armour is correct, he said, trying to look as stern as possible. Our members' handbook clearly states all members need to be at least 80 years old, or no younger than 80, or whatever. Mr. Patel will be able to join next week, and we need to make room for him. I'm sorry. Well, then I'm leaving too, Jilly exclaimed. She picked up her coat, ready to march out. Yasmin stopped her. Levi had already spoiled Yasmin's chance of winning the championship. Jilly didn't deserve to lose out on her special club as well. Are you sure, Yasmin? Jilly asked. Yasmin nodded, her nose snotty from crying. It was the most difficult decision she had ever made. But she knew she would have to leave Old. Once word got back to Fish Lane Primary School about Yasmin's biscuit-throwing tantrum, they would never let her go back as the school representative anyway. Jilly wiped the tears from Yasmin's cheeks and then turned back sharply to Mr. Matthews. I believe it is your turn to clear the tea trolley this week, Matthew. With a deep sigh, Yasmin picked up her bag and left Old and Checkers behind. Yasmin, wait! Ezra tried to follow her. Yasmin stormed on ahead, too ashamed to face him. Free from them old fogies at last, Levi cheered from inside her bag. Now you can hang out with some proper mates your own age. Kids are the best. Yasmin zipped her bag shut tightly. She'd lost the one thing she cared about most. Okay, and we will leave it there. So the next 3 chapters, so 22, 23 and 24, will be up soon. I hope that you enjoyed those and are looking forward to finding out what happens to Yasmin and Levi next.